Leo Hale woke before dawn on a Monday that felt colder than the calendar said it should. The kind of Ohio morning that made windows hum and radiators click like old clocks. And he moved through the small kitchen on Oak Ridge Lane with the slow care of a man whose knee had earned its ache honestly. He set water to boil, measured oats by habit, and laid out Nora's favorite cup with the faded violets, listening for any sound from the back bedroom where his 70-year-old wife slept light and woke gentle. Their son, Brandon, had taken the spare room 3 months earlier after a string of jobs ended faster than they began, and he slept past noon most days, heavy, restless, the door shut as if the hallway carried a draft. Leo was 72, retired after 3 decades as a police officer in Dayton, and though he no longer wore a badge, he still heard houses the way he once heard streets, catching the small changes others missed. The thermostat nudged higher when no one was looking, the cash that didn't stretch as far as usual, the new smell of sharp cologne in the hall, even when Brandon wasn't there. He kept those notes in his head at first, then on paper, because paper steadied him. He told himself it was nothing, a season that would pass, and yet the house had a new tension, thin as fishing line and just as easy to cut your fingers on. On a Wednesday, Brandon came to the table with a grin too bright and spread papers like a dealer lays cards, loan forms, pamphlets with smiling gray-haired couples, a blank quitclaim deed with their address typed neat across the top. "We can make this place work for us," he said, tapping the deed like it made music. "Transfer it to me. I do a refinance, cover taxes and repairs. You and Mom stop worrying about bills." Nora pulled the pen cap off and on, a tiny sound that told Leo the rest. "This is our home," she said softly, the words careful because she knew loud words made bad weather. Brandon's grin flattened. "It'll still be your home, just more efficient." He liked that word, efficient. Used it for people, too. Leo watched the set of his son's jaw, the way his eyes slid past Nora to the signature lines like his mother was furniture you moved to reach a wall. And he felt an old training settle in. Gather facts, slow the room, stay calm. "We're not signing anything tonight," he said, voice even. Brandon's mouth twitched. "You don't understand how finance works now." Leo didn't argue. He stood, found a spiral notebook in the junk drawer, and wrote a line he could read later without heat. Jan 23rd, 7:18 p.m. B brought deed, said transfer, refi, taxes. He skimmed their bank statements after Nora went to bed, not because he didn't trust her. He trusted her the way a roof trusts nails, but because he had seen how money told a story when people refused to. He circled debit withdrawals that landed like footfalls, Fridays, 4:13 p.m., identical amounts, and he marked credit charges at a riverboat casino an hour away. In the morning, he called the bank and asked for clarity. The woman on the line used words like authorized user and linked card, and when he hung up, the mystery wasn't a fog anymore. It was a hallway he could walk. He bought a cheap porch camera, told Nora it was for package thieves, and set it so it watched the door and caught slivers of the kitchen when the angle was right. He found his old pocket recorder in a box of badges and cuff keys, checked the battery, and set it by the phone. Ohio, one-party consent, he reminded himself, the law rasping back in a tidy sentence he had carried for years. Kara, the girlfriend with lipstick, the color of cherries, and patience for nothing that didn't shine, started visiting more. She brought coffee and remarks about aging in place and paperwork to keep things tidy, the kind of words that sounded like help until you looked at their feet and saw they were already pointed at the door. She called Nora sweetie in a way that made the kitchen feel 2 sizes too small. "We just don't want you too stressed," Kara said, and she smiled with every tooth. Leo asked simple questions and watched where people looked before they answered. The lawyer they met in a strip mall glanced at Brandon each time, as if waiting for permission to speak. Nora baked muffins because that was how she met worry, with sugar and warmth, and carried a plate into the meeting like a peace flag. Leo carried his notebook. After, he took Nora to legal aid downtown. No appointment, just the two of them sitting in chairs that had heard too many scare stories turned late confessions. The intake counselor listened, wrote, and slid a leaflet across the desk. Financial exploitation. Know the signs. Leo did not like the phrase elder abuse, the way it landed on his tongue, but he liked the list. Lists turned fear into tasks. He and Nora went home and put small protections in place that didn't look like a war if you glanced quick. Password changes, paper statements paused, a call to the county recorder to place a brief alert on title changes. "This feels like we're accusing him," Nora whispered that night, staring at the ceiling where winter light made a pale square. "We're protecting ourselves," Leo said, and he wished the word didn't sound like offense. Brandon got louder as the month thinned. "You never understood money," he told Nora, and the word never did a mean kind of work in the air. He started using "my" for things that were not his. My plan, my house, my decision. Like changing labels could change law. On a Sunday morning, Leo heard him in the garage on the phone, voice low and sharp. "Once the deed is signed, I can clear the card." Leo pressed record and did not step forward. Later, he wrote the time, 9:47 a.m., and the sentence, and he slid the recorder into the drawer under the dish towels. He visited 2 neighbors he trusted, the quiet couple who kept their porch light on a timer, and the woman with the roses who wore a scarf in every season, and asked, not for sides, only for memories. They gave him short statements with careful words. He put them in a manila folder and wrote one word on the tab, house, because that was the only word he cared to win. The snow kept its grip on the yard and on the days. Brandon pushed a meeting with a mobile notary, and when Leo did not open the door, the porch camera caught his son turning away, jaw hard, hands empty. That night, Nora sat at the table and turned her wedding band the way she did when recipes went wrong and money went short. "When did he change?" she asked, not really asking Leo to solve it, only to hear the question so she didn't have to carry it alone. "Maybe it was slow," he said. He thought of the day Brandon caught his first fish and how the boys' laughter bounced off water like light. He thought of the dented bumper years later and the big lie that felt like an early storm warning. He thought of all the doors he had stood between in uniform and all the ones he hadn't been able to in his own house. He looked at the folder, at his old patrol cap beside it, and felt the old rhythm of work return. Step, look, listen, write. The mystery wasn't who his son had become. The mystery was how to keep a roof while telling the truth, and Leo knew the answer to that, page by page. When the court notice came in a white envelope with a small window and the county seal, he held it against the light for a second before he opened it, and then he sat down with Nora and read each line out loud, slow, like a promise. The morning after the court notice arrived, Leo marked the date in block letters on the kitchen calendar and drew a small square around it so his eyes would land there each time he reached for the sugar. And then he sat with Nora at the table and read the paper again, line by line, until the legal words felt less like fog and more like a road they could follow without getting lost. He made coffee, set her the cup with violets, and slid his spiral notebook close so he could turn worry into lines that stood still. He began with a timeline because that was how his mind worked after years on patrol. Days, times, who said what, who stood where. He listed the first pamphlet Brandon had brought, the blank quitclaim deed with their address at the top, the visit to the strip mall lawyer who smelled of cologne and certainty, the porch visit from the mobile notary, the calls at 9:47 on a Sunday when the garage made his son's voice sound even harder. He taped the court notice to the inside of a manila folder he labeled house in neat black letters, then added pockets he cut from old file jackets, and named them like small rooms. Timeline, witnesses, audio, photos. He took the bus downtown with Nora and stopped at the bank first, slow on the icy steps, asking the customer rep to remove any authorized user, links tied to cards they did not remember adding. The woman clicked and frowned and clicked again, then printed a list of recent changes, and Leo asked for alerts on withdrawals over a set amount because mystery likes quiet and alerts make noise. At Legal Aid, they sat under a poster about tenant rights and waited with people whose eyes also carried a mix of fear and relief. A counselor listened, without rushing, circled words on a checklist. Pressure to sign. New friend controlling access. Unexplained withdrawals. And suggested a free clinic where a pro bono lawyer could help. The counselor also gave Nora a simple sentence to practice. Not because the court needed poetry, but because clear words are a kind of shelter. I do not want to sell my house. On the way home, they stopped at the county building and placed a temporary alert on title changes so any rush job would have to push through a new door first. Back on Oak Ridge Lane, winter light lay pale across the porch, and the camera on the eave watched the steps like a patient dog. Brandon was waiting with a new angle he called a care plan, waving a glossy brochure with smiling seniors and the phrase, "Unlock home equity," written like a blessing. He said he had found a better lender, a personal banker, and a care coordinator who could help with paperwork because older hands get tired. Nora's hands did shake a little, but not from age. She set the brochure on the counter as if it might stain. Kara showed up in a new coat with a fur collar and talked about assisted living, about how nice it would be to have meals made and pills counted and no stairs, while her eyes slid over the framed photo of Brandon as a boy with a fish, as if measuring which things would fit in a storage unit. Leo did not argue. He asked for names and business cards and dates, and when they left, he photographed the cards and put them in the photo's pocket with the porch stills. Brandon standing with the notary's clipboard. Brandon jabbing a finger at the doorbell camera. Brandon turning away with a jaw like a locked door. He walked 2 houses down after the streetlights came on and spoke to Mr. Ellison, who had the quiet way of men who keep their promises, and asked what he remembered. Mr. Ellison wrote a simple note about the weekend shouting and about seeing Brandon wave papers in Nora's face on the porch, then signed his name slow and neat. The next day, he crossed the street to Mrs. Green, the woman with the roses, who wore a scarf even in wind that tried to take it, and she wrote that she had heard banging and a woman crying and had almost called the police. Then stopped when she saw Leo through the kitchen window, steady and still, watching his family like a guard at a gate. Leo filed the notes, dated them, and underlined the times. In the garage, he found a folded printout in the trash, half covered in coffee, with the words Oak Ridge Holdings, LLC, and a filing number. He knew a company name when he saw one, so he checked the Ohio Secretary of State site on the old desktop and printed the business record. Organizer B. Hale. Purpose, property management. Address their own house. He slid the paper into Money Trail and wrote one line. Entity formed 10 days after deed talk. He called the pro bono clinic and got an appointment with a lawyer named Rivera, who told him to bring everything, and he did, on a cold Thursday that made his knee complain. Ms. Rivera was in her 30s and asked questions that made space for answers, not speeches. She read through the pockets, tapped the timeline, and said, "We keep this about protection, not punishment," which fit the shape of Leo's heart, even if his anger pressed at the edges. She explained what the court could do at a first hearing, temporary orders, reviews, pauses, and what it could not do yet. She helped Nora practice 3 answers. No, I do not want to sell. Yes, I felt pressured. I can manage my home with my husband. She made copies of the porch stills and the bank statements with the Friday 2:13 p.m. withdrawals, and she told Leo to put the most important thing where the judge could not miss it. On Saturday night, Brandon tried something new. He announced a family meeting and arrived with a man in a tight suit who called himself a real estate consultant and sniffed at the baseboards. Leo did not invite them past the threshold. He stood in the doorway with his shoulder filling the space and said, "Not today." The man slid a business card under the mat as if it could plant itself and grow. Leo took a photo of the card on the mat because details matter later more than they matter now. That same night from the bedroom, Leo heard Brandon on the phone again, softer now, saying, "She'll fold in front of a judge. She hates scenes." And Leo pressed the recorder button without moving, then wrote the words down so they could sit still beside the date. He called the bank's fraud line and asked how to flag cash transfers he did not recognize. He placed travel alerts on his own cards so no one else could. He set up text pings that turned his old flip phone into a small alarm bell. He also did smaller things that do not look like battle, but are. He moved the deed and marriage certificate from the hall drawer to a file box under his side of the bed. He photocopied their driver's licenses so he would not have to hunt for them on court morning. He refilled Nora's pill sorter so the week would not ambush them with ordinary needs while they walked into the bigger fight. On Tuesday, the mailbox held a thick envelope from Brandon's lawyer titled Petition to Authorize Sale for Parental Care. and Leo read each page on the porch while the camera's red dot winked like a tiny star. The phrasing tried to turn pressure into kindness, to turn control into protection, and Leo felt the old calm spread across his chest like a vest he once wore at midnight stops. He took the petition inside and put it on top of the house folder, then slid a single sheet into the very back pocket with a label he wrote in block letters. Last page. He did not show Nora that page yet because he wanted her to sleep. He wanted her to picture steady chairs and a voice that would hold. Still, he practiced with her in small ways. How to stand, where to look, how to breathe slow and low so her hands would not shake. They made soup, ate quietly, and planned who would lock the door in the morning and who would carry the folder. Snow softened into cold rain that ticked at the windows. The calendar square waited. In the quiet after dishes, Leo set his old patrol cap on top of the folder and sat with his hand on the brim, feeling the weight of cloth and memory and duty. And he told himself the mystery here was not whether truth would hold, but whether he could keep it gentle while he made it clear. He believed he could. He believed the room would listen when it mattered. He believed the last page would turn the way a key turns when it finally meets the right lock. Leo treated the week before the hearing like he used to treat the week before a big case review. One step at a time, no skip details, no late surprises. He started each morning at the kitchen table with the house folder open and his spiral notebook beside it, reading the timeline out loud to Nora in a calm voice so the dates would sit in both their minds the same way. He added small things that mattered later more than they mattered now, when the mobile notary had come back and left a second card under the mat. When Kara had asked if Nora's pills were too much to track, and Nora had said she had tracked 3 children and 2 jobs and 1 mortgage for 30 years just fine. When Brandon had called at 9:47 a.m. on a Sunday and said the line about folding in front of a judge, he printed the bank's change logs so the list of authorized users was in ink. He called the county recorder again and asked the clerk to confirm the alert was active. He checked the Secretary of State's site one more time for Oak Ridge Holdings LLC and printed the page that showed B. Hale as the organizer with their address as the mailing point. He called Miss Rivera, the pro bono lawyer, to ask if she wanted 3 copies or 4 of each document. She said 3 for court and 1 for them, and please bring the originals too. He put a small dot with a pen at the bottom right margin of each original page so he could tell them apart at a glance if papers got shuffled in a hurry. He also recorded 2 short statements with Nora at the kitchen table because her voice shook less when she read from words she had seen before. They were simple, just as the counselor had advised. I do not want to sell my house. I felt pressured to sign papers I did not understand. I can manage my home with my husband. He saved the audio files to a cheap thumb drive and wrote audio, Nora, on a strip of tape. He did the same with the porch camera clips, one where Brandon arrived with the notary, one where he pounded the door frame and then looked straight into the lens and said, "He has to let me in. It's my house soon." Leo printed stills from each clip and wrote the times under them in a black marker. He slid them into the photos pocket and put the thumb drive in a clear sleeve marked media. In the evenings, when the house was quiet and the winter light pulled back from the windows, he walked through the rooms with Nora and checked small things that courts sometimes ask about: working smoke detectors, grab bars in the bathroom, clear paths to exits, a list of prescriptions with dosages. He made a 1-page home capacity list that said who did which chores, what bills were on autopay, what repairs had been done in the last year, and who they would call for snow removal if his knee had a bad week. He did not write it to prove they could live. He wrote it so Nora would have words to point to when someone tried to make her feel small. He taped a copy inside the folder so it would not drift. The day before the hearing, Brandon tried one more door. He arrived at noon with Kara and a man in a sweater who said he was a care coordinator from a private agency. The man had a clipboard with checkboxes and started to ask Nora if she sometimes forgot to turn off the stove. Leo stepped into the frame of the kitchen doorway and said, "We have counsel. All questions go through her." The man said he was just here to help in a tone that did not leave much room for answers. Kara stood behind him and looked bored. Brandon said, "Mom, he's trying to see what support you need. Just sign the intake so we can start services." He held out a pen. Nora's hand twitched toward her purse, then stopped. "Not today," she said. Her voice was quiet but clear. Leo watched the porch camera's red light blink in the corner of his eye and let the scene run. After they left, he printed the clip and wrote, "Intake attempt, refused, no emergency," under the frame that showed the clipboard. He added it to the folder. He called Miss Rivera to report the visit. She said to bring the clip and also to breathe. That night, he laid out clothes like he used to do before early shift. Clean shirt, dark coat, the knee brace that made stairs possible on cold mornings, and his old patrol cap, not because the court needed to see it, but because his hand needed to feel it. He checked the car's gas. He set 2 alarm clocks in the coffee machine. He placed the last page at the very back of the folder and checked that the label was dark and square. The last page was the printed transcript of Brandon's call, where he had said, "If she doesn't sign, I'll make her sign in front of a judge." And a short note from Miss Rivera that cited the Ohio one-party consent law with the code section number, because good evidence sits better with a legal hook under it. He did not show Nora the last page that night because he did not want her to carry the sound of her son's voice into sleep. He asked her to read her 3 sentences once more and then rest. She did. The morning of the hearing came in gray, with thin rain that made the street shine like glass. Leo woke before the alarms, listened to the house breathe, and then moved through the small list he had made. Coffee, oatmeal, Nora's pills sorted into her pocket case, folders zipped into the old leather brief he had carried when he was a training officer. He put the car by the curb to make the walk shorter for Nora. As they stepped onto the porch, Mrs. Green across the street lifted a hand in a small wave. Mr. Ellison nodded from his driveway without words. Leo nodded back. In the car, Nora held the Violet's cup in both hands like it gave off more heat than it did. She looked out the window and said, "He wasn't always like this." Leo agreed with a small sound and kept his eyes on the road. He did not trust his voice with the large answer. At the courthouse, the security line was short. The metal detector beeped at his knee brace. The guard smiled and waved him through. The bailiff at the courtroom door recognized him from years ago and said, "Good to see you, Hale," in the quiet way old coworkers talk when a uniform is gone, but the work is still between them. Miss Rivera met them in the hallway with a stack of slim files. She had added color tabs to the copies Leo had given her. She looked at Nora first. "You good?" Nora nodded. Miss Rivera said, 3 sentences. That's all. I'll do the heavy lifting." They sat on the wooden pews and waited with other people whose cases were names on the docket and lives on the line. Leo read the posted list. Their case number was 7th. He watched 2 matters go fast, 1 go slow, 1 be continued because a witness did not show. He breathed the slow way he had taught rookies. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. When their case was called, the attorney Brandon had hired was already at counsel table with a stack of glossy exhibits and a voice that sounded like he had given the same speech many times. Brandon and Kara sat behind him. Brandon's suit did not fit quite right at the shoulders, and his eyes were too busy. Kara's coat with the fur collar lay across 2 seats like it wanted space. The judge was a calm woman with gray hair and a straight back. She asked for appearances. Ms. Rivera stated her name. The other attorney said his. The judge asked for a brief summary. Brandon's attorney spoke about parental care, unlocking equity, and timely management, and slid the petition forward. Ms. Rivera asked to be heard on protection first. The judge nodded and said, "Let's proceed in order." She asked Nora 3 questions in a level voice. Did she understand the papers? Did she want to sell? Could she manage her home with help from her husband? Nora answered each one with the sentences she had practiced. Her voice trembled on the first no and steadied on the next 2. The judge looked at Leo then and asked if he had records to support Miss Rivera's request for a freeze on title and accounts. Leo stood, handed the folder to the clerk, and sat again. He kept his cap on the bench beside him, brim forward. The clerk carried the folder to the judge's bench. The judge opened to the first tab and began to read. Brandon shifted in his seat. He leaned forward and whispered to his lawyer, who put a hand on his arm without looking away from the bench. The room settled into the quiet that comes when paper starts to speak. Leo watched the judge's eyes move left to right, line by line. He could not see which page she was on, but he knew the order: timeline, money trail, photos, witnesses, media index. The last page lay under all of it, waiting for the right moment. He did not rush that moment. He sat still and let the court walk the road he had laid, one small step at a time. The judge turned the first tab and asked a few more short questions that sounded plain on the surface, but felt like steps across a thin bridge. Who paid the utilities? Who kept the medication list? Who called the plumber last spring when the basement sink backed up? And each answer landed steady until the room held its breath in a quieter way. Leo watched the faces around him the way he had once watched corners on a night shift, seeing small things other people missed. The clerk's left thumb tapping a secret rhythm against the clipboard, the bailiff easing one foot back as if lining up for a clean path between tables, Kara twisting a strand of fur at her collar and glancing toward the door as if measuring escape. Brandon kept wetting his lips and then clenching his jaw, and when the judge asked him to describe his plan, his words came out too smooth at first. Maximize equity, care coordination, peace of mind, like polished stones that had never seen a field. Ms. Rivera waited, then slid forward, one photo of the porch camera, filch camera, still showing Brandon with the mobile notary at the door, and one bank page with 3 identical Friday withdrawals circled in blue. And her voice stayed even as she said, the court should freeze title and accounts until a full hearing could test claims and the pattern of pressure. And the judge nodded once, a small movement with weight. Brandon's lawyer moved to shift the narrative, holding up a glossy sheet with an assisted living dining room pictured on it. But the judge asked a practical thing. Mr. Hale, where would your parents live while the house is listed? Brandon balked a second, eyes up, then down, mouth half open, and answered, with me, of course, as if the answer had always been there. The judge's face did not move. Do they consent to that? Nora's no was soft but quick, and it landed like a pin on a map. There was a pause when the judge looked through the money trail pages, flipping easily as if the tabs had been there for her hands alone. Leo could not see which page she paused on, only saw the line of her mouth flatten slightly. He kept his own face calm and his palms open on his knees, feeling the cloth edge of his patrol cap under his left hand, like a small familiar shore. The judge asked for the signature page of the petition Brandon had filed and set it near the top of the stack, then looked up. Mrs. Hale, approach, please. Nora stood and moved to the table with the pens and the stack of forms. Leo watched her shoulders roll forward and then square again, a movement he knew from years of seeing her lift heavy groceries, steady a crying baby, steady herself. The room made a hush that felt not polite but watchful. The clerk unclicked a pen and slid it closer. Brandon leaned in from the other table, voice too bright. It's just authorizations, Mom. Don't drag this out. We're trying to help you. The judge raised a hand without looking away from the top page. Mr. Hale, you will wait to speak. Brandon's jaw ticked. Legal air has a different weight than street air, Leo thought. It asks for patience, even as it invites panic. Nora picked up the pen. She signed a line that allowed review of records because Miss Rivera had told her that was safe in the short term. She breathed shallow, then deeper, and reached for the next page, the one that would allow a temporary transfer of authority over listing the house. The tip of the pen hovered, then drew back a bare inch like a bird pulling from icy water. Brandon made that small, sharp sound Leo remembered from teenage arguments, a click in the throat that always came right before he said something he couldn't unsay. You've been useless your whole life, he hissed, and in the instant before the bailiff could step, his hand flashed out, fast, practiced, full of a kind of heat that had nothing to do with care, and struck Nora's cheek. The sound cracked around wood and glass so cleanly that even the flag at the front seemed to tighten. The pen fell and bounced once against metal. Nora's head turned with the blow. She did not cry out, but her hand went flat on the table as if steadying the whole room by herself. Time narrowed. Leo rose. His knee complained, but his body did not. He had stepped into rooms like this before, when voices were rising and something fragile was about to break, and he did the thing that brings rooms back. He did not shout. He lifted his old cap from the bench with a slow, deliberate motion, set it down on the table in front of him like a quiet gavel, and said in a voice that did not have to be loud to carry, "Your Honor, please check the last page." The bailiff had Brandon's forearm already. Brandon jerked once, half turning, and then stilled because the temperature of the room had changed, and even men who live by swagger feel that drop. Kara's mouth opened, but no sound came. Ms. Rivera's hand found Nora's elbow lightly, steadying without fuss. The judge's face did not show surprise. It showed a tightening, like a lens pulling a far thing close, and her words came slow and sure. "Clerk, the folder." The clerk brought the house folder up again, and the judge turned pages with no hurry, because control is a pace as much as a position. She read the labels that Leo had written in block letters: timeline, money trail, witnesses, photos, and then slid a finger under the last tab where the thick paper lay. She pulled out the single sheet Leo had labeled last page and the small notation Miss Rivera had added with the statute number beside one-party consent. She read. The room seemed to lean toward the bench. Brandon wet his lips. His lawyer shifted in his chair, eyes flicking to the exit and back. The judge lifted her eyes. "Mr. Hale, is this your voice on this transcript?" Brandon started to shape a word that might have been context, that might have been edited. But the judge raised a hand gentle and final at once. "You will answer yes or no," he stalled, then said, "It sounds like me, the way people talk when truth is too hot to hold barehanded." The judge nodded to the bailiff. "Cuffs, please, and step him back from the table." The click of metal was not loud, but it removed something from the air, like a weight you stopped trying to balance and simply set down. Nora's cheek had flushed red where the hand had landed. She lifted her fingers to it, then let them rest against the wood instead. Leo kept his eyes on the judge, not on his son, because looking at the judge kept him in this room, in this moment, in the work he could do. The judge spoke again, and now her voice had the edge that comes when a court moves from listening to acting. Protective order is granted effective immediately. Petition to authorize sale is denied pending a full evidentiary hearing. The court orders a forensic review of respondents' accounts. Mr. Hale, you are remanded on contempt of court and assault in the presence of the court. Kara found her voice then, a thin thread. This is absurd. He's only trying to... The judge did not look at her. Counselor, sit your client. She is not a party. The lawyer placed a hand on Kara's sleeve and drew her down. Brandon tried to twist toward Leo as the bailiff turned him. "Dad," he said, and the word came thick with something like rage and something like fear. "You're doing this to your own son." Leo kept his voice steady, the way he had kept it on long winter stops where the wind ate curses and left only facts. "No, you did this when you chose power over care. We're choosing safety." He did not say more. The judge had taken the last page and placed it face up on the bench, and for a moment the black letters looked like ferries in a harbor, lines carrying people from one side to the other. Ms. Rivera asked to mark the transcript and the porch images as exhibits. The judge said yes and wrote the numbers in the margin. Then she addressed Nora directly, and her voice softened without losing shape. "Mrs. Hale, you will not sign anything today. You will go home under the protection of this order. If you need the sheriff to escort you, say so." Nora nodded, and her lips trembled and then steadied, and when she spoke, her words were small but clear. "I want to go home." The judge said, "You will," and turned back to the paperwork, signing with a pen that made a quick, sure scratch, like a seam repaired. The bailiff guided Brandon toward the side door. He went, cursing under his breath, but the words had no place to land now. The room did not clap or sigh. It simply adjusted around the new facts, as rooms do when a piece of furniture that blocked the light is finally moved. Leo sat only then, because the sitting felt like completing a circuit. He put one hand lightly on Nora's back, not to hold her up, but to let her feel he was there. The judge stacked the documents, set the last page on top for a heartbeat, as if to let the room see it, and then passed everything to the clerk. "We reconvene in 2 weeks," she said. "Between now and then, there will be no contact from Mr. Hale to his parents. Any breach will be met with consequences." She looked at Leo last. "Officer Hale, good work organizing your record." Leo nodded once, the way men do when praise is both balm and responsibility. He picked up his cap, not to wear it, but because the brim facing out had done its quiet job, and he felt, in the calm after the crack, the mystery he had bet on settling into place. Sometimes the smallest movement, a hand placing a cap, a judge turning a last page, turns a room. Leo and Nora left the courtroom slowly. Not because their legs were weak, but because the air felt new and they wanted to step into it without rushing. And in the hall, the bailiff handed Ms. Rivera stamped copies of the temporary orders, while a clerk explained, in the practical voice of offices, how those pages needed to touch the right places. Sheriff for service, recorder for title alert, banks for holds. And Miss Rivera turned to Leo and laid out a short list that cut through the fog. Take 2 certified copies home. Change the locks today. Call the bank fraud desk from the kitchen where you can read numbers off the statements. And start a fresh log that shows compliance with the order and any breach. Leo nodded and wrote each item in his spiral so the day would have bones. Outside the courthouse, the winter light looked scrubbed by rain, and the air smelled like cold iron and wet paper. They walked to the car with the folder tucked under Leo's arm and the old patrol cap in his hand, the brim pressing his fingers like a reminder to stay measured. On the way home, they stopped at the clerk's office for certifications, a small fee, and a big stamp that made paper into tools. Then drove to the sheriff's substation, where a Sergeant Leo knew from long ago said service on Brandon would be handled in the jail because he was still on the afternoon docket. And the sergeant added, in a kind tone that did not feel like a favor, that patrol cars could make a pass by the house the next few nights. Back on Oak Ridge Lane, the porch camera's tiny red eye winked as if it had been waiting. Leo unlocked the door, set the folder on the kitchen table, and stood a moment with his hand on the smooth wood, as if testing whether the room would hold his weight. It did. He called a locksmith, and when the van pulled up an hour later, the man moved quickly in the fading light, swapping deadbolts, handing over new keys, offering a firm handshake that said this house now belonged to the people who had paid for it twice, once with money, once with worry. Leo texted the new key code to their daughter, Elaine, in Columbus, and typed only what was needed. Court went our way. We are safe tonight. Elaine called anyway, voice shaking with relief and anger, saying she could drive up. And Leo told her to wait for the weekend because Nora needed quiet more than company that day. He made tea. Nora sat at the table with both hands around the cup and stared at the window where the dusk pooled like ink. The red mark on her cheek had softened to a faint map of what had happened, and she touched it once, gently, and then put her hand flat on the wood as if she could press the house into staying. Leo called the bank fraud line, read account numbers slow, asked for hard blocks on wire transfers and cash advances, removed authorized user links the bank rep admitted had been added via online session, and set text alerts to ping his old flip phone whenever more than $20 left a checking account. While he waited on hold, he looked at the porch camera feed on the small screen, then at the hallway, then at the folded transcript at the back of the folder, and the mystery in the day, the question of whether the room would listen. Felt answered, yet he knew new questions were trotting in from the horizon. Would Brandon work around the edges? Would Kara try another door? Would some office he had not thought of call with a routine verification that was not routine? After tea, he and Nora walked the rooms the way sailors walk a deck after a storm, not touching every wall, but letting eyes brush old corners. The dent in the hallway where a laundry basket once hit when the smoke alarm shrieked. The scratch in the dining table where a toy truck carved its history. The photo on the bookshelf of Brandon at 8, water behind him wide as a promise. They did not talk about the photo. They checked the basement window locks and the back door, tested the motion light, and wrote in the log, locks changed 3:40 p.m. Title alert confirmed. Bank alerts active. Nora set out 2 plates and cut apples and cheese and placed them neat, a small meal that felt like a ceremony. And while they ate, Leo's phone buzzed with 2 bank pings. Attempted debit, declined, limit reached. Then attempted transfer, blocked per hold. And he wrote the times down and felt the old steadiness fill his chest like a slow tide. Just before 7, the recorder's LED blinked while the landline rang. The voicemail caught Kara's voice leaving words that pretended sugar. "This is all a misunderstanding. We should talk adult to adult." And ended with a thread of threat. "Real estate moves fast," that hummed in the room after the beep. Ms. Rivera returned Leo's earlier call and said the order bound Brandon, not Kara, but harassment could be added if it continued. She asked Leo to save every message, take screenshots, and not answer. And she sent a brief template letter he could print that said all contact must go through counsel. Leo printed 2 copies, slid one into the house folder, and taped the other inside the hall closet by the phone so his hands would find it before his temper did. At 8, Mr. Ellison knocked and asked if Nora needed anything carried from upstairs. He had a toolbox and a wool cap and a way of standing that made rooms feel reasonable. And Leo let him replace a wobbly railing screw at the back steps while they talked about weather and ball games the way men do when the real subject stands in the doorway and listens. At 9, a marked cruiser rolled by slow and steady, and Leo lifted a hand. The officer flicked headlights in reply, and the street felt seen. Before bed, Leo carried a plastic bin into the spare room and began to pack some of Brandon's things. Cords, a pile of shirts, a stack of mail. Just enough to clear the bed and the desk, and he wrote on blue painter's tape, "Property of B, to be retrieved by third party," and set the bin in the garage against the far wall, behind the mower, where it would not be the first thing a door saw if it swung open too fast. He did not touch the old photo albums on the shelf. He did not want to let his hands remember more than his head could hold. He moved the folder to the bedside table, placed his old cap on top with the brim out, and lay down with his bad knee propped by a pillow. The house made its small night sounds, the heat kicking, the refrigerator humming, the whisper of wind in the gutters, and instead of bracing against each noise, he let them stack into a wall that held. In the morning, he woke to the soft thump of mail and found a certified letter slip inside. Attempted delivery. And his chest tightened until he saw the sender line on the green card. County Recorder. He and Nora ate oatmeal, then drove downtown again, and the clerk at the recorder's window slid an envelope under the glass. Notice of rejected instrument. Someone had tried to record a quitclaim deed at 11:58 p.m., and the alert had flagged the packet. The attached note said rejected for insufficient acknowledgement, and the stamp date matched the night before the hearing. Leo felt a cold anger pass through him like a shadow and then go, and he wrote the time, the date, and the filing number in the spiral and asked for certified copies. The clerk obliged with a practiced nod. Back home, Ms. Rivera answered his text with 2 words, "Good catch," and a longer instruction, "Bring it to the next hearing." Later that afternoon, the bank's fraud team called to confirm his report and noted 2 gas station declines an hour from town. Leo asked them to put travel holds on all cards until he lifted them and to send new plastics. The rep said yes and told him to expect overnight shipping. He added this to the log. At dusk, Mrs. Green called out from across the street that a woman had left a white envelope on their porch and walked fast to a dark sedan. The porch camera confirmed it was Kara, chin set, eyes forward. Inside the envelope lay a single page typed in italics about family duty and wasting time, unsigned. Leo photographed the page front and back, slid it into the witness's pocket, because sometimes the best witness is paper that shows its own hands, and called Ms. Rivera, who said she would send a brief cease and desist to Kara's email with a line about harassment and court sanctions. They did not respond to the note. They made soup again and sat at the table with the folder between them like a third person who knew how to listen. That night, after the dishes were done and the log was updated, Leo went to the hall closet and set the cap on the top shelf with the brim facing outward. Then returned to the table and wrote a short list for tomorrow. Call the forensic accountant, schedule a home safety check with the fire department, photocopy the rejected instrument notice, ask Elaine to come Saturday to help sort paperwork drawers. He added 1 more line under the list. Not a task, but a sentence that put shape on the day. "We are safe in our house tonight." Outside, a car idled at the corner, then rolled on. The motion light came on and went dark. The street returned to its ordinary quiet, the kind that carries a small mystery of its own. What we'll try next, and will you be ready? And Leo felt his answer in his hands, in the folder's weight, in the steady breath of his wife in the chair beside him. Yes. The 2 weeks between the first hearing and the full one did not move fast or slow. They moved like careful footsteps on winter ice, one after the other, eyes down, hands out for balance. And Leo made sure each day had a clear start and finish, so the middle would not swallow them. On Monday, he called the forensic accountant whose name Miss Rivera had given him, a quiet man named Patel, who spoke like a metronome and asked for clean copies of bank statements, credit card histories, and any cash withdrawal logs going back 1 year. Leo scanned each page on the old desktop and labeled them by month and account before dropping a thumb drive at Patel's small office near the courthouse. Patel promised a summary by Friday and explained how he would color code lines that did not match ordinary senior household patterns. Leo liked the phrase because it sounded like a fence he could see. On Tuesday morning, the county fire department sent 2 men in Navy shirts to do a home safety check. They tested smoke alarms, added a free carbon monoxide detector at the top of the basement stairs, and left a checklist with green checks beside clear egress, non-slip bath mat, and stairs lighting. Leo slid that list into a new pocket called home capacity because judges read neat pages with more patience than they read stories. And this page said without argument that Nora and Leo could live safely where they were. After lunch, he and Nora met Miss Rivera at her office for witness prep. Mr. Ellison came in with his wool cap in his hands and read his short statement out loud, eyes on the words, voice steady. Mrs. Green arrived late with a scarf snapping in the wind and sat straight in the chair, describing the night she had heard papers slap the door and a woman cry. Miss Rivera thanked them both and explained how the judge might interrupt to ask for times. Leo saw relief in the neighbors' faces when they realized they would not have to tell every story, only the true parts they had seen and heard. That evening, the sheriff's office called to confirm Brandon had posted bond on the assault charge with conditions. No contact, no return to the house, no indirect messages. And the deputy read the list like a grocery order. Leo wrote it all down and thanked him. He felt the old ache where a worry tries to grow, but the protective order and the bond terms sat on it like a boot. Wednesday brought 2 small tests. First, a text pinged Leo's flip phone from a number he did not know. Dad, can we talk? Kara says we can fix this if you drop the order. The message used his son's name, but did not sound like his son. It sounded like a pitch. He took a photo of the screen with Nora's tablet, saved the image, and did not reply. 20 minutes later, the landline rang with a man who said he was from the electric company, offering a senior discount if Leo would confirm the account number and mailing address, which the man then read out wrong. Leo set the phone on the table, pressed record, and asked for an employee ID and a callback number. The man hung up. Leo logged both events with times and added possible utility scam because he had taught rookies to assume a second knock follows the first. Thursday, he called Elaine in Columbus and asked if she could come Saturday to help sort the desk drawers. She arrived with a box of clear sleeves, a labeler, and a hug that took a second longer than usual. Elaine moved through the papers like a librarian, pulling duplicates, building a simple index, and creating a bright tab that read, Court, this week. So Leo could reach for it without thinking when nerves made his hands clumsy. She sat with Nora after lunch, and the 2 of them looked through a small album of good days. Birthdays on the back porch, a fishing trip when Brandon was 8, Nora in a blue dress at Elaine's graduation. And they cried in the quiet way people cry when air is finally safe enough to carry tears without dropping them. Leo let that room be theirs and went to the garage to make space for a second bin of Brandon's things. He wrote a new label, to be retrieved by third party with police present, and texted Ms. Rivera to ask how to arrange that without breaking the order. Ms. Rivera replied with a plan. She would email Brandon's attorney with 2 dates and times when a deputy could stand by while a mover picked up the bins. No hallway conversations, no porch scenes, she wrote. Leo liked that. It turned a worry into an appointment. Friday, Mr. Patel called. I have a preliminary, he said, voice exactly as even as before. Leo and Nora sat in Patel's office while he slid 3 printouts across the desk. The first showed a year of ATM withdrawals, with 11 clusters on Fridays at 2:13 p.m. Pattern, Patel said, circling the time. The second sheet traced a path from their joint account to an online wallet and then to a card in Kara's name, with dates that matched the casino charge slips Leo had already circled. This is called dissipation, Patel said, when marital or family assets are used for unrelated purposes. The third sheet listed hotel charges in months when Brandon had claimed he was staying over to help. Patel gave Leo a 1-page summary with bullet points and a small legend of colors. Leo took the pages and felt the mix of relief and grief that numbers bring when they confirm what your stomach knew. Back home, Leo added Patel's report to Money Trail and updated the timeline with Patel's phrases. Ms. Rivera called in the afternoon and said the prosecutor handling the assault charge would likely offer a plea that included counseling and a longer no-contact period if Brandon accepted responsibility. It's separate from our civil case, she said. But outcomes can rhyme. She asked Leo to bring the rejected instrument notice from the recorder and the porch stills. She also suggested a brief capacity letter from Nora's primary care doctor. It's simple, she said, just a sentence that says she understands decisions and can manage daily tasks. Leo called Dr. Singh's office and explained. The nurse knew Nora, knew her slow jokes, and set an appointment for Monday morning. The weekend filled and emptied like a steady tide. Elaine labeled files and then drove back to Columbus with a kiss on Nora's cheek and a promise to call each night. Leo changed the porch camera angle to capture the sidewalk and the street in case anyone paused near the mailbox. He printed a fresh "no soliciting" sign and taped it under the doorbell. He cooked eggs and stacked dishes and let Nora sleep late Sunday after church. In the afternoon, Brandon's attorney emailed Miss Rivera asking for a sit-down to find common ground, and Miss Rivera replied with 5 words, "All communication goes through the court." Leo read the short chain twice and felt the strength in it. Monday, Dr. Singh met Nora in a small exam room that smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and asked kind, simple questions while Leo sat in the corner and said little. What pills do you take? How do you refill them? What day is your hearing? What will you say to the judge? Nora answered without looking at Leo, which mattered more than the words. Dr. Singh typed, printed a letter on letterhead, and signed it in blue ink. Mrs. Hale is cognitively intact and able to manage her home with support from her spouse. On the way out, the nurse squeezed Nora's hand and said, "Good luck," in a tone that knew luck was what people say when they can't give you the law. Leo slid the letter into home capacity. On Tuesday evening, a maroon sedan idled across the street for 10 minutes. The porch camera caught a woman in a knit hat looking at her phone and then at the house. Mrs. Green texted Leo, "Strange car," with a timestamp. The sedan drove off before the cruiser swung by. Leo added the clip to photos and wrote, "No approach, no contact," beside the time. Wednesday, a volunteer from a senior resource center came by with a pamphlet on support groups for families dealing with adult children and finance problems. Nora took it, set it by the Violet's cup, and later moved it to the drawer where she kept recipes she might try someday. "Maybe later," she said, and Leo understood. Thursday morning, Leo walked the path from front door to car to courtroom in his head, felt his knee in each step, and put the brace out with his clean shirt. He lined up exhibits by tab, timeline, money trail, photos, witnesses, home capacity, and the last page, which he checked but did not reread. He called Miss Rivera to confirm witness order and who would carry what. She said, "You bring the folder, I'll bring the law." He smiled at the sentence. In the evening, he and Nora sat on the porch under thick blankets, though the air was still sharp. The street hummed in its ordinary way. They did not talk about what might happen if the judge split accounts this way or that, or whether restitution would make numbers feel like justice. They talked about dinner, and whether the earth under the maple would take tulip bulbs in March if the freeze let up early. When they went in, Leo set the folder on the table and his old patrol cap on top, brim facing outward, because that arrangement had become a small ritual that turned fear into work. Before bed, he updated the log with the simplest entry of the week. All set for court. Evidence ready. We are ready. The house answered with the familiar click of heat coming on. In the morning, they would drive downtown again. The mystery now was not whether their story would be heard. It was how the judge would weigh the pieces. Leo shut off the kitchen light, felt for the chair with his hand the way he always did in the dark, and whispered to Nora as she passed, "We walk in together. We walk out together." She nodded. The folder waited like a steady heart on the table, and the night held. The morning of the full hearing arrived clear and cold, the kind of Ohio light that made edges sharp, and Leo moved through the kitchen without hurry, checking the house folder, the knee brace straps, and the small list he had written the night before. IDs, exhibits, Nora's pill case, Dr. Singh's letter. Then he set his old patrol cap on the folder the way he had each important day, brim facing out like a small compass. Nora came in wearing the navy dress with the faded flowers, and he poured her coffee in the Violet's cup, and they stood a quiet minute watching steam lift as if it could carry worry with it. The drive downtown felt shorter than last time, maybe because the first shock had passed, and what remained was work they knew how to do. They parked on level 2, walked the slow slope to the elevator, and reached the courtroom with 10 minutes to spare. Miss Rivera waved them over, crisp in a gray suit, and whispered the order. Patel first with the money trail, then Mr. Ellison and Mrs. Green, then Dr. Singh's capacity letter by stipulation if the judge agreed, and finally brief remarks. Brandon sat at the other table with a different lawyer and no Kara. His suit looked newer, but his eyes moved fast, and he kept rubbing the spot under his cuff where the bond bracelet had rested. When the judge came in, the room stood, sat, and felt as still as a church before the first hymn. The judge began by noting the protective order still in effect and a joint stipulation that Brandon would retrieve bins of property under sheriff's standby next week. She then nodded to Ms. Rivera. "Call your first," she said. "Mr. Patel?" Miss Rivera answered, and the forensic accountant took the stand with the quiet confidence of someone who likes numbers more than arguments. He explained his methods in simple language: bank statements, ATM logs, cash transfers, merchant categories, then set 3 color sheets on the easel: a chart of Friday withdrawals at 2:13 p.m. 11 times in 1 year, a flow diagram from the Hales joint account to an online wallet, and then to a card in Kara Avery's name, and a list of hotel charges on nights Brandon had claimed to be staying with his parents as a caregiver. He used short sentences and pointed once with the back of his pen. "This is dissipation," he said. "Funds moved for purposes not tied to the household." The judge asked 2 questions about dates and 1 about the online wallet. Patel answered and sat. Brandon's lawyer tried to suggest the transfers were reimbursements, but when pressed for receipts, he had none. Miss Rivera called Mr. Ellison, who spoke in his slow, solid way about the Sunday morning on the porch. The papers waved in Nora's face, and the tone that made him consider crossing the street until he saw Leo in the kitchen window standing steady. Mrs. Green told the court about the night she heard banging and a woman crying, and how she almost dialed 911 before the noise stopped. She kept her hands folded in her lap and looked at the judge, not at Brandon. Miss Rivera moved exhibit tabs as each page landed. Leo watched her hands the way he once watched a partner guide traffic through a dark intersection. One move after another, no wasted motion. The judge admitted Dr. Singh's capacity letter without requiring testimony and read it aloud. Mrs. Nora Hale is cognitively intact and able to manage her home with support from her spouse. The sound of those words in that room made Nora's shoulders drop half an inch, as if someone had taken a bucket from her arms. Then came the hard part that was also the simple part. Ms. Rivera laid the county recorder's rejected instrument notice on the table and walked the judge through it. Attempted quitclaim deed filed at 11:58 p.m., 2 nights before the first hearing, flagged by the alert, rejected for insufficient acknowledgement, filing number stamped in red. "This attempt tracks with Mr. Patel's timeline," she said, and slid the Oak Ridge Holdings LLC printout under it, Organizer B. Hale, address of the family home. Brandon's lawyer asked to be heard and tried to frame the LLC as estate planning, but the judge's face did not change. "Estate planning does not strike a spouse," she said, matter of fact, then asked if the criminal case had moved. Ms. Rivera reported a plea offer on the assault charge with counseling and extended no contact. The prosecutor was present in the back and nodded once. The judge asked if Nora wished to address the court. Nora stood, holding the edges of the witness table like the rail of a boat, and said her few practice sentences. "I do not want to sell my house. I felt pressured. I can manage my home with my husband." Her voice shook on pressured and steadied on home. Brandon's lawyer called Brandon. He spoke about intentions, care, modernization, efficiency, and about how things got heated. But when Ms. Rivera asked him to read a line from the last page transcript, "If she doesn't sign, I'll make her sign in front of a judge," he read it quietly and did not look at his mother. The judge had seen enough rooms like this to know when a story was finished. She stacked the exhibits, placed the last page on top as if to remind everyone what turned the case, and leaned forward. Her ruling was plain and complete. The court finds a pattern of pressure and attempted transfer inconsistent with the protection of these respondents' interests, she said. Title will remain with Leo and Nora Hale. The court enjoins any attempt by Mr. Brandon Hale to transfer, encumber, or list the property. The court orders restitution for funds dissipated in the last 12 months in the amount calculated by Mr. Patel, subject to adjustment if additional records appear. The temporary protective order is made permanent for a term of 2 years, including no contact direct or indirect. The court awards reasonable attorney's fees to respondents. The court further directs dissolution of Oak Ridge Holdings LLC if organized for the purpose of circumventing these orders. She looked at Nora and Leo. "You may remain in your home." She looked at Brandon last. "You will comply. If you do not, consequences will follow." The gavel's light rap felt less like thunder and more like a door closing with a clean latch. There was no applause. Paper rustled, chairs creaked, and the clerk began to mark the orders. Miss Rivera exhaled for the first time in an hour and squeezed Nora's hand. Leo stood and gathered the folder slow so he would not miss the feel of the moment. Brandon stared at the table as if the wood might tell him a better answer. His lawyer spoke to him in a low voice and pointed toward the side door where the prosecutor waited with his own file. Leo did not approach. He had learned long ago that some stairs burn and some stairs feed fires. They walked out the way they had walked in, together, measured. And in the hallway, Miss Rivera handed Leo certified copies while a clerk underlined filing numbers with a bright pen. "Sheriff will be at the house at 10 next Wednesday for the bin retrieval," Miss Rivera said. "Leave the garage door open. Do not engage." Leo nodded. "Thank you," he said, and meant the thank you for more than the papers. On the courthouse steps, the air tasted like clean stone after rain. Nora paused, turned her face to the thin sun, and let her eyes close. "Home?" she asked. "Home," he said. They drove back along streets they had known for 40 years, and the houses looked like themselves again. At Oak Ridge Lane, the porch camera blinked its small red light, and the new lock clicked in a way that satisfied the hand. Inside, the rooms were ordinary. Mail on the mat, the radio blinking 12, a plant by the sink needing water, and the ordinary felt like wealth. Leo put the folder on the table and the cap on top, brim out, and they made tea. Elaine called from Columbus, and Leo held the phone between them so she could hear both their voices. Mr. Ellison knocked to say he had seen the cruiser roll past and that the maple would take tulips if the ground softened next week. Mrs. Green waved from across the street, with her scarf flying like a flag. In the late afternoon, the mail carrier slid a thick envelope through the slot with the judge's stamped orders and a separate notice from the Secretary of State accepting dissolution paperwork for Oak Ridge Holdings, LLC. Ms. Rivera had filed it the hour after court. Leo set that notice face up on the table for a full minute, then slid it under the last page, as if the two belonged to each other. Toward evening, Nora stood at the sink and touched her cheek where the red had been. Only a pale echo remained. She looked at Leo, and he saw the steadiness he had first fallen in love with, back when the world was mostly plans and small apartments. They ate soup and bread. After dishes, Leo stepped onto the porch with his cap in his hand and listened to the neighborhood sounds. Kids arguing about a basketball foul, a dog barking twice then quitting, the low hum of a television through an open window. He thought about revenge and justice and how the loudest part of their fight had been a single crack in a courtroom and the quietest part had been a judge turning a last page. He went back in, set the cap on the top shelf of the hall closet, brim facing out, and wrote the final line in that week's log. Orders entered. House hours. We sleep easy. Nora turned off the kitchen light. The dark settled not like fear, but like a blanket. Somewhere near the maple, a late winter bird tried a few notes, stopped, and tried again. The house held. So did they.